There she is, my milk of magnesia. God must have broke the mold when he made you. Come here.
Have you ever had a hug like this before?
It's so nice.
All right, rewind the tea kettle because the Kardashian family just served another piping hot pour that's equal parts eyebrow raising and mess you can't look away from. Kourtney is reportedly erupting. Scott Disick is doing his patented flirty but not flirty thing. And Khloe is front and center, laughing off the rumors on her new podcast while the internet invents cliff notes to a romance that never happened. Let's be clear, this is the kind of family drama that reads like serial television, except the characters live in beachfront mansions and their group texts leak into the global timeline. The foundation of the mess is a simple, awful human truth. Familiarity in celebrity can be misread as intimacy. Scott Disick is the ex who never fully exited the family story. He's the guy who fathered 3 of Kourtney's children and then lingered in their orbit as friend, ally, and occasional chaos agent. That proximity is fertile ground for rumor, and so when Scott likes or comments under Khloe posts, or smiles a little longer than social etiquette dictates in a family photo, the internet auto-completes the headline into a romance that rarely existed beyond the headline writer's imagination. Context. Khloe hosting Scott on her podcast is not an accident of content strategy. It's a move that reads like a balancing act. Put the most requested guest on the mic, let them joke through the salacious topics, and then frame the narrative. It's the same tactic the Kardashians have used for a decade: transparency as brand armor. But the optics are complicated because Kourtney, the woman Scott separated from, has built a life with Travis Barker and publicly asserted boundaries about family and parenting. A joke on a mic becomes a public document. The public then treats that document like scripture. There's a specific recent spark. Headlines about Scott leaving flirty comments under Khloe's glamorous posts from events like high-profile weddings. Flirty comments, in the celebrity context, are performative, cheeky, eyebrow-raising, and designed to keep attention on the account holder. But when your comment thread reads like a serial, past behavior and context matter, Scott's flirtations are not new. They're a repeated motif that whispers a story of chemistry that never quite needed to be true to generate engagement. The moment a comment feels puzzling, the collective imagination sweeps in and writes an entire subplot. Let's not pretend this is only gossip. This drama taps into deeper cultural questions about loyalty, the rules of ex-relationships, and how public life externalizes private negotiations. What do you owe an ex who is still deeply tied to your family? Is it possible to be family adjacent and not have that adjacency warp how other people interpret your affection? The Kardashians have long turned rich personal complication into episodic gold, and the Scott-Khloe dynamic is a perfect case study for the platform-driven era where intimacy and PR interlock. And then there's Kourtney, whose reaction is being framed as an eruption. That word, erupt, is theatrical but apt. Kourtney has historically responded to transgressions with a combination of public vulnerability and private decisiveness. Whether it was the storyline around Scott's infidelity during their relationship years, or the way she's navigated parental boundaries post-split, she's now married to Travis Barker, and their union recast her public brand into something more anchored, yet still porous to rumors. When the ex who fathered your kids plays up flirting with your sister, your reaction will be judged on 1,000 axes by 1,000,000 strangers. Let's unpack a recurring theme: the public's appetite for messy, non-traditional pairings inside famous families. The moment 2 people of different relational positions, sister and ex's friend, develop a close, affectionate rapport, there is a reflexive hunger to turn that into a romantic narrative. It's a cultural shorthand. Proximity equals possibility, but this ignores nuance. Khloe has always been loud and blunt about being protective of her family, and yet she has also cultivated relationships that cross conventional lines without them being romantic. People conflate warmth and flirtation with something it is not because it's a story they want. The scandal machine is bolstered by selective reading. For years, outlets have cherry-picked moments, flirty lines, arm brushes, late-night texts, and then built a through line that suits the headline. That's what Kourtney and others pointed to when they highlighted Khloe publicly slamming the nasty narrative that she had hooked up with Kourtney's ex. It's a public correction designed to diffuse a story the internet amplified. But the reality is more complex. Khloe's denial is a PR move and a personal rebuke at once, signaling to fans and family that the storyline is both false and personally invasive. Let's talk about how the family machine processes these moments. The Kardashians have the rare ability to neutralize or monetize controversy, turn it into an episode, a podcast clip, or a social post that controls the frame. Khloe's decision to air the conversation with Scott on her podcast is an example of narrative management. She can laugh, she can roll her eyes, she can own the framing. But owning the framing requires risk. The frankness invites more press, more clips, and therefore more speculation. When you throw fuel on the fire to demonstrate you're not burning, the flames often dance for the cameras anyway. Now let's bring in the legal-like logistics of co-parenting and custody. Scott isn't just a former lover, he's a father to Kourtney's children. That connection complicates any simple reading of his presence in the family. Co-parenting is messy for anyone, and when the stakes include public image and brand integrity, the emotional calculus becomes more fraught. Kourtney has every right to assert boundaries around her kids and their exposure to tabloid narratives. When the public breathes down the neck of a family, even a lighthearted comment can be read as a breach of trust. Historically, this is not the first time Khloe and Scott have navigated flirtation rumors. They've exchanged barbs and jokes across red carpets and reality show scenes for years. But what's different now is the post-Kourtney with Travis landscape. Travis is no passive third party. He's a visible, protective husband with a brand and a fan base. Any suggestion of boundary transgression can be read as a potential affront to the marriage, even if inaccurate. It's also worth noting that the family has friction points, sibling rivalry, management decisions, and old resentments that make neutral interpretations rare. From a cultural commentary angle, the fixation on Khloe and Scott's flirtation reveals something ugly about gendered narratives. When a woman jokes with an older male family friend, the public often reads it through a romanticized lens that delegitimizes friendship. Meanwhile, the man's flirtation is framed as charming or mischievous. That double standard is a live wire in this scandal. Khloe's defensive denials are policed in ways Scott's comments are not. And when Kourtney's outrage is framed as an eruption, the conversation quickly becomes about temperament rather than boundary setting. Let's return to the textual evidence. Both Khloe and Scott have explicitly denied any romantic relationship, calling the idea psychotic and acknowledging the applause and punishment that would follow if anything more than friendship were true. The denials are not just for the press. They're content that clarifies boundaries to the fan base and, crucially, to Kourtney. Remember, the family group chat is the real primary audience. Public statements serve to stabilize family relations and signal intent because private reconciliation often requires public fence mending when your life is a show. Now, let's be bold. One reason this story persists is that it's a distraction that serves multiple agendas. Tabloids need stories that regress to the sensational. Influencers and content creators need hot takes to drive engagement. The Kardashians sometimes benefit from provocation because controversy converts into content. This ecosystem encourages repeated flirtation because it yields perpetual headlines. It's a feedback loop where every wink gets broadened, framed, and monetized. So while Khloe and Scott may be genuinely just friends, performative gestures can be exploited by the attention economy. There's also the generational speculation component. Younger fans are conditioned to interpret intimacy as performance. The Kardashians, who birthed the modern attention economy, are both victims and architects of that system. When Scott tropes as the ex who's always around, it becomes a serialized character that fans invest in. People project, they ship, they rewrite private history into romantic canon. The Kardashians then either accommodate that narrative or correct it. Either way, the resulting noise benefits content pipelines and corrodes privacy. Let's dig into the motive. Why would Khloe have Scott on a podcast? First, he's the #1 requested guest. Second, he's a person with a rambunctious backstory that will produce clips. Third, having him on allows Khloe to control the narrative in a way that better suits her current brand arc. Khloe's brand mixes vulnerability with hustle. A candid conversation about rumor and family protects while also generating the kind of raw, shareable soundbite that modern media devours. It's not a betrayal of Kourtney per se, but it is a tactical move that requires the family's internal diplomacy. The family responses are not monolithic. Kris Jenner historically keeps tabs and orchestrates moments, but each sister has her own threshold for what's acceptable. Kim often positions herself as mediator. Kourtney has increasingly asserted autonomy. Khloe trafficked in confessional empathy. Kylie and Kendall watch the optics. The group dynamic is a complicated social calculus where public utterances ripple into private texts and legal calendars. One text can become a headline, and one headline can become a rupture if not handled delicately. One should also contextualize this within recent news about domestic disputes, therapy revelations, and the family's shifting approach to showing personal life on screen. Over the last few seasons of their series, there's been a through line about mental health, healing, and whether all family trauma should be filmed. That debate reframes this story. Is a podcast a space to heal, or is it a stage for PR triage? Khloe is using a platform to challenge narratives and to speak for herself, which can be therapeutic. But it also invites clips that can be weaponized by critics who prefer a simpler story. There's an economic dimension too. Ratings spike when there's conflict, and sponsorship deals land on the back of listener numbers. A frank admission of flirtatious banter and a subsequent denial fuels more bites for the content cycle. That's capitalism at play. Drama equals attention equals monetization. The family's commercial interests and their private welfare often exist in awkward proximity, and fans are entitled to wonder whether the podcast is catharsis or commerce, honest reckoning or calibrated storytelling. Let's get personal for a second. How might Kourtney actually feel? The eruption might be less about jealousy and more about boundaries and dignity. If a former partner continues to participate in a public performance that leans into flirtation with a sister, it complicates a former partner's attempts to move on. Kourtney has had a long arc with Scott. Early romance, messy public fights, co-parenting, and eventually her decision to marry Travis Barker. That arc deserves respect, and any suggestion that Kourtney would simply shrug off a family-level provocation is naive. At the same time, it's reductive to just villainize Scott. He's a complex figure who has publicly wrestled with substance abuse, fatherhood, and the aftermath of a relationship that grew under intense scrutiny. His joking, his flirtation, his brother banter are all defense mechanisms, and often scripted to an extent by the social context he's operating inside. That doesn't absolve him if he crosses lines, but it does mean his actions come with backstory. And those histories should temper the rush to moralize. Looking at the public statements and the reporting, the best-case scenario is a family conversation where boundaries are clarified, trust is rebuilt, and the kids are kept away from the circus. The worst-case scenario is endless tabloid cycles, more sources claiming friction, and the family's private tensions becoming an entertainment product that deepens wounds. Historically, the Kardashians have navigated both outcomes. They can de-escalate or they can spin it into content. Sometimes they do both at the same time. Another angle. The public loves a weird triangle because it's narratively satisfying, ties that bind, betrayal, and a moral judgment to be made. But we should be cautious about the desire to judge. Public opinion loves binaries, but human relationships are messy and often resist the neat categorization tabloids demand. A friend can be flirty without being disloyal. A comment can be performative without signaling intent. A sister can be protective without being irrational. Nuance is not a water down. It's a refusal to weaponize feelings for clicks. Media literacy matters here. Most outlets that amplified the hookup story were doing what news outlets have always done: prioritize clicks over nuance. That's why Khloe had to dismantle the narrative on a podcast, and why Kourtney felt the need to report on her rebuke. We're in an echo chamber where one out-of-context clip becomes a thesis about a person's morals. If anything, this saga is an argument for slowing down the gossip machine. Read the interview, listen to the conversation in full, and don't let a headline stand in for the whole truth. Here's a kicker. This story will likely metastasize into another season of soundbites because the emotional work of a blended family is never done. When exes co-parent, remarriage doesn't eradicate complications. It simply reshuffles them. Kourtney's pivot to a quieter, more private domestic life with Travis was meant to be a reset. But the reset collides with the old scripts that came from 9 years of reality TV and relentless suspension in public view. That history doesn't protect anyone from speculation, and the internet will be relentless. Let's not underplay the cultural stakes. When celebrity narratives become moral panics, they influence how fans perceive consent, friendship, and loyalty in their own lives. The urge to believe salacious stories about famous people sometimes mirrors deeper issues about what counts as appropriate behavior or how family loyalty should be performed. The Kardashian soap operas are often proxies for those issues, and this Scott-Khloe story taps that vein in a very public way. Predictably, social media has split into factions. Some fans call for protecting Kourtney's dignity. Others insist that Khloe can be friends with whomever she pleases. And a third group is simply entertained. The chorus is loud, and the family is, as always, both subject and author of their own mythology. Whether the rest of the family publicly intervenes or stays silent will shape subsequent headlines and the tone of reconciliation. The family's next moves will tell us whether this is a moment of real boundary enforcement or another chapter in public theater. So where does this leave us? In a scene that is equal parts personal and performative. If Khloe was trying to shut the narrative down, she did so in a way that handed more gifts and clips to the press. If Scott was trying to be cavalier, he reignited questions he might have otherwise avoided. If Kourtney is erupting, she's reclaiming boundaries but risks being cast as dramatic. The family's real task is internal, to decide what is private and what is content, and then to live by that decision in the messy, attention-starved ecosystem they inhabit. For the culture at large, this episode is a reminder that celebrity relationships are often shorthand for broader social conversations about decorum, trust, and the commercialization of intimacy. The Kardashians pioneered the attention economy. They know how to command it. But even architects of spectacle have to negotiate the human fallout of being spectacles, and spectacle has a habit of outliving people's actual healing. As for the tabloids and the gossip brigade, expect more clips, more speculation, and more people drawing moral lines in comment sections. Expect hot takes from influencers and reaction videos from creators. Expect the family to either fold the chatter into a narrative they control or to let it bleed into further private rifts. The only thing predictable here is unpredictability, which is what keeps the feeds feeding and the podcasts popping. All right, final take. This is less about a flirty comment on an Instagram post and more about the endurance of a narrative. The story persists because it's useful to someone, to tabloids, to engagement metrics, and sometimes to the subjects themselves when drama becomes a way to process and monetize complicated feelings. Whether Kourtney really erupted, whether Khloe truly feels betrayed, whether Scott's flirty persona is harmless or hurtful, these are questions that matter to their lives, and they also make for efficient headlines. If you want the receipts and the direct reporting, read Khloe's podcast interview, the AOL and Collider write-ups, and Kourtney's coverage for the specific quotes and context. But don't swallow the sensational shorthand whole. The truth is messy. The family dynamic is complex, and the headlines are designed to look like final judgments when they're really starting points for conversation. If you love drama, you'll binge this. If you crave nuance, listen to the full episode and judge less by the clips. Smash that like if you want more deep dives into celeb family dynamics. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up episodes. And tell me in the comments, is this a protective sister reclaiming dignity? Or is it a family that needs to privatize pain and stop serving it up as content? I'll be here, parsing the receipts and the real feelings until the next headline drops.